All right, I think we're live now.
Okay.
So we're going to start. All right, well, guys, welcome to week 4 of our summer reading at Crosspoint. We are reading through a book called Confronting Christianity, and we started this summer just to read a book together since we can't actually be in person. And this is something that we actually do as a staff as well. Every other week, we read a book together, and then we meet and discuss. And so we wanted to start this to bring you guys in on the conversation, that you can read a book along with us. And maybe some of you haven't read, or you're just now picking it up, or you're curious by the question, and so you just want to jump in and listen. We're glad to have you too. Feel free to put comments in the chat box, in the YouTube chat box, ask questions, or even just make comments, and we'll look at those every now and then. But for the most part, we're just going to have a conversation about the chapter. So with this book, Rebecca McLaughlin is addressing a different question every week about Christianity, and sometimes just about religion in general. And so this week is the question, doesn't religion hinder morality? And so before we start, well, I do this every time. I have us introduce ourselves, but I think at this point, everyone knows who we are. So I've got Matt Warren with us, and Amy Clackham, and then myself. Lane Ruman couldn't join us, but anyways, he might surprise us and jump on the call. I doubt it, but we'll see. So we're just going to talk through chapter 4. And again, this question is, doesn't religion hinder morality? I think out of all the questions that I looked at in the table of contents, this one was probably the most confusing to me, as far as I don't know if I've heard this question before raised. That was before I read the chapter. As I read the chapter, I started to understand it more. But originally I was thinking, I feel like religion would be the thing that, best supports a system of morals. But anyways, what did you guys think? Was this a question that you didn't think would be in the top 12, or were surprised by, or wasn't? Because this is something you hear a lot.
Well, again, for me, it's the overarching idea of religion, that she's not saying, does Christianity hinder morality? Right. As much as does religion? Because I know before I went to India, the first time I did a lot of studying of the religions that were over there, mostly being Islam and Hinduism. Yeah. And the things I learned about Hinduism, there was not a lot of care for life from what I read. And so some of the stories, some of the narratives that they had. And so I guess I could see it. It's not something I think about really consistently, but it's something that I can understand that question in a worldview.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Religion does hinder morality in a world where we think that everyone's truth is their truth and morality is what people perceive it to be. So what's interesting about that statement is, in the modern context, sure it does, because we are implying, no, we're not implying it. We are saying outright that our system of morality is divinely inspired, that it has been given to us, and that it is an ideal that we can't achieve without a relationship with that entity that then gave it to us. And so by doing that, we are actually hindering the modern concept and definition of what morality is, which is subjective versus objective. And same thing with truth. Your truth is a subjective thing. Truth is not. It's an objective thing. Yeah. And so that's, I think it's a great title to the chapter.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like the take too. And especially in the beginning of chapter 4, because she gives an example of how this can be dangerous. So she talks about ISIS, and she references this informational booklet that was created by ISIS on questions and answers on taking captives and slaves. She gives a pretty vulgar example, I think, to make her point about how we can all agree this is really messed up and wrong, and yet this is all done in the name of God, in the name of Allah or religion. And so, is it permissible to have intercourse with a female slave who's not yet reached puberty? Answer, it is permissible to have intercourse with a female slave who hasn't reached puberty if she is fit for intercourse. So this is a real question and an answer from the Nadia Murad's Tale of Captivity with Islamic State. This is actually I think a journal entry that she references the questions and answers from ISIS. And she uses this to kind of make, I guess, an atheist point about like religion can make us do some really bad things, and do it all in the name of God. In fact, I think we're going to hit more on this next week, because next week she talks about, doesn't religion cause violence? But she points out some problems with this on pages 60 and 61. Would anyone like to talk about those problems or explain them for us? Matt, do you mind? Uh-oh.
Did we lose Matt?
Yeah, right when I asked him a
I
question.
think he did that to get out of the question. I'm not sure what's happening here.
That's okay, Matt. I don't know if you can hear.
I don't know. You can't hear me?
You're back.
Can you see me now? Am I back?
I can see you now.
Am I back?
Yeah.
I'm not sure God wants me to answer this one. It might have to be Amy. That might be his way of saying, no, don't do it. So there's a couple of issues that I have, and I don't know how much this directly references the book.
Yeah.
I think it does a little bit, but so the first problem is, and she says this a little bit later, that like you can't assume that all religions can agree on what morality is, first of all.
Yeah.
And then two, I think the main issue though is the nature of God. So in a pagan religion, most pagan religions, and I'm not talking about Islam at the moment, but in most polytheistic pagan religions, people don't trust their gods, first of all. It's a major difference in how you approach your faith. Gods can be very human in their characteristics. And in fact, their worshipers expect them to. So their worshipers expect to get tricked, beaten, raped, murdered, all these things from their deities. And so that leads to a very different concept, frankly, of what morality is. And even a divine given morality, right? So like if Zeus says murder is wrong, that doesn't mean he won't commit murder. He's just saying it's wrong for us, not him, and that he's on a different span of existence.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is the exact opposite of that. It's the same actually with Allah, the same with the Hindu gods. Jesus Christ is on a different spectrum, because Jesus is saying, this is the standard by which I am holding myself and exemplifying it to you through the way I'm living on the earth as a human.
Right.
So first of all, giving up his divine nature, which no other religion does, period. But that's not the conversation we're having today, so I won't get into that. But then as a human, Jesus is exemplifying the standard which we can never meet.
Yeah.
Right. And saying, this is how I'm going to live myself. And that creates what we have as Judeo-Christian morality, which she differentiates in that discussion on what was it? What is it called? Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that starts on page 62. So that's how that sort of leads into that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, it does. Yeah, just raising problems about this in general. I mean, another one she makes is that this claim actually doesn't fit the data. Like when we look at the data of religion's effects on mental health, on morality in general, and people, doing acts of self-sacrifice and so on, like it doesn't fit the data. Actually, those who are more religious tend to be more moral, and so it shows to be the opposite. So she just makes a point of like, actually, factually, like if we look at the statistics, this isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
That's why in the news, you're not shocked when you hear that a Christian donates to charity. She makes that point. Like rarely do you see that, because that's not surprising. It's more surprising when you hear about, a secular organization doing something like giving money to charity or a foster home or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So explain this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I have to confess my ignorance. I didn't know this thing existed.
I didn't either.
So Matt, what exactly?
Yeah, you did. Come on, don't lie. Yeah, you did.
I don't think I did. What exactly?
If I could say, of all the chapters, this one I'm reading it going, wow, I just do not feel like this one is just above my knowledge level.
So there were several things that led to this, but I don't want to spend too much time on the history. World War I was a big factor in a lot of this, because in that you've got gassing civilian populations. You have 80 million people died, either from Spanish flu or conflict.
Right.
In that 40 million from the war, another 40 to 50 million from the Spanish flu, which honestly was spread pretty quickly because of the war. There was torture. There had never been. There was this idea, mostly in Christian nations, that you couldn't do certain things. But before this, like in America, we have on the books like ways that it was legal for the government to torture people before a certain time. Now, that I don't want to get into the discussion of whether or not we still do it. We can have a waterboarding talk like somewhere else. But before there were prescribed ways you could do things. Like, the British government threatened to draw and quarter George Washington if they caught him. That's where they tie 4 limbs to 4 horses and tell them all to gallop away at the same time in different directions. And that was a sanctioned government form of torture and execution. And this sort of acknowledged that that's not a thing we can do. And that was coming from the mindset of Judeo-Christian nations saying God gives us intrinsic value as individuals, right? Yeah. This is when, like, say, the abortion argument might sort of get birthed out of this idea that people have intrinsic value that God gives them. Because of that, they need to be treated in a certain way. This is different than, say, like a Geneva Convention type thing, which is specifically talking about the rules of war, like what countries are allowed to do or not allowed to do in a war. But it is this idea. So when it says, and this is a pretty modern idea, because it says, Eleanor Roosevelt, who chaired the committee, it's like Eleanor Roosevelt. So we're talking 20th century here.
Right.
Right. So a very recent development in moral evolution. But I think the point she makes is that for people to claim Christianity was not a major factor in this, like, we know that's a lie, because all the people that wouldn't sign on to it said, we can't sign on to this because it's too Christian. Yeah. Right. Like the atheistic Chinese representative of Mao wouldn't sign it.
Yeah. Can we take God out of this? Yeah.
What now?
Yeah. He says, can't we take God out? Can we just take God out of the state?
Right. Well, no, because where the crap is this morality coming from? Like this belief system came from somewhere. And then, of course, the Muslim nations like Saudi Arabia couldn't sign it either because it was too Christian.
Right.
In its origin. So I thought it was awesome that she brought it up as an example.
Yeah, well, and then the next example she gives right after this is also up your alley, Mr. Warren, about just the ancient world. She goes and looks through history to show us on how, the idea that all human beings should be valued equally was far from normative in the ancient world.
Yes.
And this reminds me of, Matt, we've talked about this book called Dominion by Tom Holland, who himself is a proclaimed atheist, but yet what he shows us is that throughout history, we see just the impact and influence of Christianity on just the moral compass for the world and for history. Right. But what I love about that is if you actually watch interviews with him about his book, he talks about how his mind really changed on this, because originally he was kind of following where Rebecca explains her friends from Cambridge about how they were kind of feeling towards Christianity, how it's corrupt. There's a lot of bad thing that's been done in the name of religion, so therefore it's all bad. But actually, as you begin to really consider the claims of Christianity, who Jesus was, and you realize how radical that was for his day. One of the things I highlighted was about on page 64, she talks about how Christianity believes that God became human in the person of a poor manual laborer from a defeated backwater of the empire who was tortured to death by the political and religious authorities of his day. And I feel like the way she describes Jesus there is the person that I see us fighting for human rights. Like he chose to be the most, to be marginalized, to be mistreated, and just to see how Jesus treats women and children. This was all just very radical and not what you expected.
Well, that's in a society where the husband could legally kill his wife or child.
Right.
In certain cases. And well, also in an empire built on slavery.
Yeah.
So these concepts of human, the Romans owned more slaves per capita than any other empire in human history. They had a bunch. And there you come Jesus saying that this is not okay. That humans have value no matter who they are, that women, that widows, that orphans, these just specifically naming disenfranchised groups that didn't have value, now they have value, which actually speaks a lot to Christianity's. I think Christianity naturally focuses on supporting disenfranchised groups, whoever they may be. from that time to now. But one thing we talked about earlier was even, and you touched on it, Hunter, was the atheist's acknowledgement of how religion can positively affect a society. And I'd mentioned, like, there's a lot of people that will look at the American founders and go, see, now these guys weren't, you might say they were all believers, but a lot of these guys were deists and they weren't actually Christians. And I say to that, good, because the ones like Jefferson and Madison, who may not have had a genuine faith, were the ones that were also saying religion is so necessary for the betterment of United States society, because it promotes general welfare, generosity. People will focus on raising families, on all these things that are good.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be kind to one another and welcoming to one another. Like, religion is such a positive influence on society that, like, it actually means more to me that non-Christians were acknowledging and weaving that in to our national history than if a bunch of believers did it, actually.
Wow.
In some ways.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, and she mentioned too, because from a secular perspective, a philosophy for human rights, it's hard to find building materials for that type of philosophy. Like, those are hard to come by, to find reasons for why humans have dignity, why humans should have rights. On page 63, I think she references a philosopher named Ronald Osborne. He mentions that by core humanistic values of inviolable, is that how you say that?
Mm-hmm.
Inviolable human dignity, human equality, so on, cannot be upheld by a scientific naturalism that will ultimately always crumble into nihilism. Because ultimately, when you boil it down, life is meaningless from that perspective. In fact, I think what's towards the end of the
69 is the one you're looking for. That list of questions, and at that end there, is abortion, euthanasia, suicide, paying taxes, foreign aid, or anything goes? I mean, that's a terrifying thought, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, based off of the basis, if we're basing it off of just the fact that, again, there's no God, purpose of the universe, there's none, meaning of life, none. We're just here out of, dumb luck, and, all of these answers are just meaningless. Then ultimately, where do we get our standard of morality from? Like you said, Matt, it can't be relative. It can't be subjective. I remember there was a little clip of Ravi Zacharias that went viral of a college student who said, "Why are we so afraid of atheism? And why can't we just trust people to be good? Like, naturally, I'm not going to go out and rape people. So why do I have to be a Christian to not rape, and so on? And why can't we just all trust each other and blah, blah, blah?" And his response was, he asked him another question, and he said, I have a question. Do you lock your doors at night? And of course the student said yes. And so he explained, well, that goes to show me that, again, you don't trust people, because, ultimately, if we go off of this idea that, everyone chooses what's good and what's bad, I can choose to say that what you have is mine, and you should, and I think stealing's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Even murder, if it comes to us getting into a disagreement, I think you're wrong. And, all this kind of stuff, like, ultimately, we don't have any justification for why something is wrong or right. There's, the foundation for that is going to collapse in on itself.
Do you remember
dictate that?
Do you remember the video with Spruill where they're sitting in a conference and and the guy says, help me answer this question. My brother doesn't believe in sin. He thinks that morality is basically saying, my truth is my truth. How do I convince him that sin is real? And he just sits there, looks at him and goes, steal his wallet.
Yeah.
I'm like, right. Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Steal his wallet and see how he.
Yeah. Well, right. No, it's my truth. Your wallet is my wallet now. That's what I believe.
Right. I believe that wallet belongs to me. Therefore it does. And your moral argument doesn't mean anything more than my moral argument. I mean, society would break down in a heartbeat. If we really believed that morality was determined by each of us and ourselves individually, that sounds pretty in a philosophy course, but but society would break down and go away.
Right.
In a heartbeat. And this has happened in human history. You can look back and find cases where this took place. In the Bible, Babel being one of those. But even the Ten Commandments, when we talk about the Ten Commandments in the Bible, we acknowledge that God didn't necessarily give the Israelites the Ten Commandments. I don't know if I'm breaking up because you guys are freezing a little bit.
No, I can.
God didn't give Israel the Ten Commandments, assuming that would then help them follow them. He gave them the Ten Commandments to give them a moral compass, right?
Right.
So that they could actually start to understand, here's where I'm messing up. And so, I don't know. It's just the insinuation that we get our morality from ourselves is nuts. And there's too much evidence that our value comes from God. Well, how do you know that? How do you know God is real, much less gives you value? Well, he killed his own kid so that I could have a relationship with him. That is fairly indicative that he thinks I have priceless value.
Yeah.
Well, Christianity, how can you say Christianity started the concept of social justice at all? Well, because it didn't exist until Jesus helped us create it.
Yeah.
Nobody before Jesus, with the exception, obviously in the Old Testament, you see this happening. Jesus wasn't changing that morality, but Jesus started the idea that charity needs to be a part of what we do. That, when he's naming these disenfranchised groups, when he's naming groups of people that are cast out by society, and then saying that as Christians, you will be cast out by society.
Right.
He's starting this concept that we are to fight for those who can't fight for themselves.
Right.
That didn't exist in the world. It didn't exist on the planet until him.
Yeah.
So to deny that Christianity was the main, if not the only major influence in the modern concept of morality is nuts. And then people take that and say, because they're now, and what's interesting to me is people have been living under the aegis of this Judeo-Christian moral system for 2,000 years, and then only have the ability to understand it because they've had the benefit of living in it. A society that has been ensconced in it for that long, can they then say, well, I don't need this to be moral because I know what's right and wrong? Yeah, you do, because God told you. Anyway, sorry, I'm too passionate right now.
No, I love it. In fact, it raises more questions in my head of why do we feel the need to completely abandon our heritage? I feel like today morally, so many people are trying to find ways to justify the need, for us not to have God, not to need God to be moral. But what we're seeing, especially from this book, is just showing on how, any conclusion you come to, you hit a dead end. It collapses on itself. The logical conclusion of secularism and atheism is what you said, Amy. Anything really goes. So if we go back to the beginning of the chapter with the questions out of and answers from the ISIS pamphlet, is it okay to rape a young slave woman who hasn't hit puberty yet? Anything goes. Which that sounds so crude, and that's a drastic example. And she's using that to say that's the point. You and I would both say that's insane, that's wrong, that's cruel.
And so many people want to say we're talking about this thing. Well, this thing is whatever you want. It's fine. What you decide, what I decide, your decision doesn't impact me, but you take this thing and you walk it out to its logical end. Right. And we've arrived at this issue.
Yeah. I'd like to bring it maybe more on the ground too. So I'm thinking about, an atheist friend I have, or if you guys can think of, friends of yours who are non-believers. They don't think religion is good for the world, or they just think it's fine, but I don't need it. How do we engage in conversation? Because I know it can be a delicate thing, and I've heard this from apologists like Ravi Zacharias, to completely deconstruct someone's worldview. And that's what she's doing. She is deconstructing the atheist secular worldview. This doesn't work at the end of the day. How do we do this as Christians in a way that is loving and gentle, and also not just for the sake of showing them that they're wrong? What are some ways that you think can help us? Because what I want to be careful of as we read this is to go, see, you're wrong. This doesn't make any sense. We're right. If anything, I think I love that she did this at the end. She said, she's talking about, again, Christianity gives us the best justification for human equality. And yet Christians can make no claim to innate moral superiority. To be a Christian is to acknowledge your utter moral failure and to throw yourself on the mercy of the only truly good man who ever lived. So, we're not to come in here as the moral superior ones saying we know what's right and wrong. Instead, while knowing what is true, we come in going, and I've completely missed the mark here. That's why we need grace. And so I love that humble posture. So what I'm wondering is, for us, what counsel would you give or advice would you give for helping engage non-believer friends in a way that is gentle and helpful, especially when it comes to deconstructing a worldview like this?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways, because you're right. Deconstructing a worldview too fast leads to blanket denial and generally anger and even violence. But I think the one of the most important things you said is that if we approach it like we're trying to win something, then we've already missed the mark. And I know I sound like a broken record to you two, because I say this all the time, but like, winning is never our goal as Christians. Well, for two reasons. One, because Christ already won, so who cares? And two, our goal is to save people. Our goal is to disciple and love and serve for the purpose of saving souls so that they can live with us in heaven forever. Duh. Like, I know I'm oversimplifying, but this is what our goal is. Yeah. So if your goal is to save someone and not win, you're going to approach that conversation really differently. Because you're not readying your arguments to take them down. You are, and Christianity sells itself. I'm sorry, but most of the time our witness is the answer to this question. If I have a friend who thinks that religion is bad for the world, then I would submit my life as an example to the contrary. And if my life is not an example to the contrary, that is on me, not Christianity. So if my friend can look at my life and say, well, but Matt, but you're obviously the exception to that rule, then that opens the door for me to say, actually, I'm not. I promise you, I am not. First of all, I would never use myself as the moral compass that you should base your life off of. But if you're saying I'm the exception to the rule, I'm here to tell you that I'm not, that I am very atypically Christian. And I would love to invite you more into my world so I could show you that. Because again, if we're doing what we're supposed to do, they're going to see that there's a difference. And you said it earlier, you said the world's not surprised when a Christian gives to charity. Great. Thank God we're famous for something good. When we lived in China, they actually used to say to always bring cash in your pockets to church on Sunday, because there weren't a lot of Christians in that city, but all the homeless knew that the Christians were generous. So the entire homeless population would gather outside the churches on Sunday in Hohhot, because they knew that the Christians would come out and feed them, give them a little bit of cash for the week, get them in touch, pay a medical bill. Like it's pretty amazing, actually. But in that city, no one knows anything about the theology of Christianity, but they do know that those Christian guys are generous and kind and loving. And that's appealing to people.
I mean, my thought to your question, Hunter, is just that it's not a short game, that this is through relationship. And I know that that's something that we all believe here, but this is, again, I'm not sitting down to win an argument. I am inviting you into my life. You don't have to think like me, look like me, believe like me to be a part of my life. Put your legs under my table, be a part of my family, spend time with us, get to know us. It's a coming alongside someone and not a, here's the 15 reasons you're wrong. I don't like this behavior or this behavior or this behavior. My goal is not behavior change for them. It's just to introduce them to the Jesus that I pray my life overflows love for. Yeah. And that just in the midst of being around us, there's a question, that feeling that, because I believe we're all created with this deep desire for Christ and for this more, and people search it out in 1,000 different ways, or try to shut that down and go, nothing matters, nothing is. And so my prayer is that it just awakens that place inside of them that eternity has been placed inside. And then the questions begin to be had. I can't answer or argue abortion with a friend. I have a friend who's an atheist, and we have gone round and round on abortion stuff. And that's not helpful. So instead of engaging in that place, let's spend some time living life together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And I love to just learning to walk in humility as well with all of this, remembering our past and what we were saved from, our own blindness and ignorance, and acknowledging too, like, part of what's so freeing about Christianity is like, the compass or the standard of morality did not come from within me. Like this truth is not something that I've discovered and found out for myself. Like, it's outside of us. And, in fact, that's something that I think I'd like to see if me and this non-believing friend could both agree to. Like, okay, so when we read this thing about ISIS, we can both agree that, the standard for figuring out if this is good or wrong doesn't necessarily come from within us, because that came from within him, whoever wrote this. And we know that's wrong. And so obviously there's got to be something bigger that's outside of us, that our compass of what seems right and what seems wrong is kind of off. And I mean, we know why that's the case. We live in a Genesis 3 world, in Genesis 3 bodies, right? And so recognizing that something is off and helping navigate, like leading to, this is the conclusion that I've come to based off of the scriptures, that to me make a lot of sense for this.
Absolutely.
All right, well, guys, we've hit our time.
Well, and I just saw a question pop up, and it's.
I was actually going to ask: are there any questions we can answer before we go?
Yeah.
Okay, she says so. Tony Maxey, I'm so excited that you're joining us.
Yes.
She asks, "What is bad faith?" Which, if you go to page 67, that's the section title here. That's titled "Bad Faith," and I'm trying to. Okay, so I remember this is the example she gives of Dr. Offit, who had a good reason to think that religion did hinder morality, and this was because I believe some children's. Was it children's hospital?
There was a church that chose not to vaccinate kids, and kids suffered because of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, he wrote a book that originally said how Bad Faith was the title of the book, How Religious Beliefs Undermines Modern Medicine. And slowly came to see, because originally he was thinking religion's illogical and potentially harmful for us, because again, we just have blind faith and we think that we don't need medicine and so on. But actually, as he began to consider the claims of Scripture and the Bible, he changed his mind, because he looks at Jesus and he saw how he treated children. And he had this breakthrough that Christianity is the single greatest breakthrough against child abuse in history, observing, among other things, that the first Christian... I'm reading on from a sentence. But basically, he came to see just how much Christianity actually values human life and values especially the lives of children in a time in history where their lives were not valued at all.
Right.
She references the Christian emperor of Rome, who actually made these words are hard.
Infanticide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Infanticide.
He outlawed that.
Which was a big deal, because there were religions in the empire where you could sacrifice your kid.
Right.
So, but I think the question that Tony's asking along, so what is bad faith, or why is this called bad faith? And they go on to say that. To me, I would think what this has to do, it reminds me a lot of the quote from Gandhi about how he likes our Christ, he just does not like our Christians, and how this person was basing what they thought was the bad faith of Christians on some actions of people who are not necessarily walking the faith out.
Right. Yeah.
And so versus when he went and learned who Christ was, right, he no longer called it bad faith. He no longer saw bad faith. Yeah. It was just a matter of, it was the actions of the believers.
It makes me.
But I think to address the issue directly too, in this particular case, because I reread it again, we were talking about it. I mean, these are people saying we're not giving the kids the medicine, God will save them or not.
Right. That's blind faith.
And again, James said something really poignant in a sermon several times, which is God does not save you from your own stupid decisions. That we are given the opportunity to trust the Lord, and we are given the opportunity to use the things he gave us. This is a hard issue because I've actually seen people healed through faith. So I get it. Like, I've seen that happen with my eyes. I've watched someone get up when they shouldn't be getting up. I myself have been healed through this. And in each of those situations, it's not like I wasn't taking my meds and then daring God to do it. Jesus even says, don't test the Lord your God. Don't make this about, you do this or else to the Lord, because that mindset is not a healthy one, and is very different from you going to him, pleading for him to help, or even having faith that he will help. In those situations. In that particular situation, you've got people basically throwing it in God's face and going, we're the boss, not you. Now fix it. And that's not healthy faith.
Well, another way I'd put it, which I think is what this book gives the example of, is blind faith is bad faith. And it doesn't mean that we're not expectant, like you said, Matt, when we pray and ask for healing, but that doesn't mean that we turn away the medicine out of this blind faith of saying, oh, no, I'm trusting. So, because that could very well be the means through which he brings healing and so on. So,
right.
All right. Well, that was our only question. So we'll go ahead and log off. But guys, thank you for joining us. Next week, we're going to be reading chapter 5 and discussing doesn't religion cause violence? So this will be a fun one as well. So thank you guys for tagging along, and we'll see you again soon.